lifestyle medicine vital signs or Vitalities. If you've not yet watched the 10-minute introductory video to the development of Vitalities or lifestyle medicine vital signs, we would invite you to do that now. We will be refreshing a little bit, but largely building upon what we presented there. The core concept of Vitalities is to have a tool or system for routinely and simply assessing and monitoring the drivers of health and disease, not just the symptoms. We need a dashboard of an individual's health engine, if you will. What is it that's producing the results that we're seeing and getting right now? What can we do to monitor that? Okay, to go into a little bit more detail, what is typical or the current context? Typical traditional vital signs are blood pressure, weight, pulse, maybe a BMI. They're somewhat measuring outcomes, but they're really not measuring drivers for the most part. Yes, obesity may contribute to hypertension or diabetes, but what caused the obesity? Obesity in and of itself is a symptom. So we really need to go to the upstream sort of process and approach and not just measure outcomes and symptoms. For example, exercise is a vital sign. That's great, but why stop there? Exercise isn't the only thing that affects our blood pressure. We need a comprehensive approach. We need to get our arms around all the fundamental pieces. Functionally, this has to be able to be used very simply, very straightforward, red, yellow, green, obvious visually how this works. And again, this is for patient-focused process and practice. This is more for the patient's benefit than for the provider's benefit. Yes, we need to benefit from it too. We need metrics, we need numbers, we need to be able to track and all of that. But this system also has to be universal. This needs to cross over into day-to-day life, into employer wellness programs. We need a universal language and set of metrics that means the same thing everywhere all the time. And that can empower research and all kinds of other uses. But in any and all of these uses, it is fundamentally for the benefit and the use of the patient. So what is the best, or what are some of the best clinical uses of Vitalities, of a lifestyle medicine vital sign system in clinical care? I like to use it during check-in. I think that's the fundamental way to use this. When someone is coming for an office visit and they're in the process of checking in, they fill this out. That's what I've been doing for over a year in my own practice. Now, the first time that they do this, it's a single sheet, front and back. The first half of the first page is Vitalities. It's what you see, it's the visual. The bottom half of the first page and all of the second page is the explanation. Basically, short explanations for each of these metrics. What are we measuring? Little description. What's a 10? What's a 0? What's a 5? For most of these, to give people a reference point, help them start to get a feel for what's good and medium and bad, if you will. So the first time that may take them up to 10 minutes, but subsequent times it gets much faster very rapidly. The third time they're usually zooming through it. They have a pretty good sense of what we're after. You could do this in the exam room. You could have your patient get roomed, and it could be completed with or without a staff member or a medical assistant present. Again, the core concept is that people should be able to sort of do it on their own. We are trying to empower them. We are trying to educate them in the process. Support your patient population in whatever way is most appropriate. You can use it as part of proactive practice. If you have a patient population especially that is capitated, ideally for your benefit, the better you do for your patients, the better you do financially. That's often a good incentive structure. Use it for health monitoring routinely, kind of like a Fitbit. We use that for monitoring how our health is running. This is fundamentally designed essentially to function on a weekly basis. What has your health been like for the last week? If people want to use it every day as a check-in, that's fantastic. If it's just periodically, then use it that way. But an ideal best mixed balance, once people are used to it or have gone through a training session or a program, is probably once a week. Another use can be as a fundamental tool for a lifestyle medicine program. You may be working with an individual or a group through a relatively intense process to significantly change their lifestyle. This can be a great metric to keep the important things front and center on their radar, monitoring their progression. Again, this can be used in many different ways: wellness programs, incentive programs from employers, otherwise, and again, should become a universal system, pretty much used by everyone, everywhere, all the time. Now we're going to walk through sort of the guts and the details at this point. What does this mean in practice? What do we need to be thinking of in terms of what's happening with this patient as a provider? So let's start with number one, resilience. Again, we touched on that this is essentially the inverse or the opposite of stress. And we touched on why it's in the first position, because stress, our nervous system tone, our mood, our autonomic nervous system, is the immediate driver of our behaviors, and it's the filter through which we perceive world, the life, and what's going on. So it shapes everything else. This is, to a large degree, a measure of attitude and will influence all the other answers. So it's sort of a good check as a provider of how the rest of things are going to tend to be shaped, just given their frame of mind at this point in time. This is sort of touching on that 24/7 built-in pharmacy concept, if you will, as well, physiologically. Now, this does have some challenges. Probably the foremost is that many people are just not much in touch with their real physiologic stress level. High stress has become normal in modern society. That said, there's ways that we can go about this that help us get to, well, what physical symptoms are you having that give us good clues or indicators as to your nervous system state. Now, the other challenge is that often people assume that stress is a matter of the stressors in their life or their circumstances versus their stress experience, which actually often has very little correlation to the stressors themselves, or at least to the magnitude of the stressors. Again, we've tried to shape this in a way that sort of bypasses a lot of that, but we need to be aware of the fact that when we talk stress, many people shift into the mode of, well, let's look at my checklist. What stressors do I have going on, or is my life good? Therefore, that must be the stress I'm experiencing or not experiencing. Not how it works. Very important to understand that distinction. Stressors do not equal the stress that's experienced. Now, we will be continuously seeking to improve this. At some point, I would love to have some sort of objective measure that we can put into this, whether it's something we do in the clinic or that can be part of a smartwatch or a tracking device on stress. Those would be fantastic. Doesn't obviate or take away from the fact that we're getting this on people's radar, we're having them start to think about it, start to be aware of it, which is the most important thing. Okay, number two, rest. Now, this is not just sleep. We're talking about physiology. Physiologically, it is very related to stress. Rest is how we recover from stress, how we reset. So resilience is, what are our rest systems and functions, and are they working well? Are they working for us? We have good stress capacity. So resilience is a matter of the restorative dynamics that we do have control over. Again, Vitalities' key concept. These are things that people have control over. This is not a measure of your genetics. This is not things that are beyond people's control. This whole Vitalities concept is, given the environment that I'm in, what can I manage? What can I shape? How can I run my engine? So there shouldn't be much of anything either in the model, in the tool, or in your mind that says, oh, well, we're just tracking things that there's nothing you can do anything about. Okay, very important distinction. Okay, sleep is the obvious single biggest thing in terms of rest. How well is it working? I find that if I had to boil it down to just one single question to ask people to best understand this is, do you wake up feeling refreshed and ready to go for the day? The answer to that, the degree to which that is true or untrue, that's the nutshell. That gives you the single best snapshot of how well their sleep is working on a regular basis. It may also be very helpful to ask, do you snore? In our day and age with a lot of loneliness, there's a lot of people that don't have anyone else around, no one that would know. So while they may have some idea, I am surprised by how many people say, I don't know, I'm not awake. Well, there's no one else around that would know? Nope, there's not. Unfortunate reality of modern life. And of course, you could use other metrics or systems to further screen or drill down into more details. You can do a more comprehensive history taking, which should be part of your lifestyle medicine-based history. And you can do things such as validated instruments, stop bang, or similar systems to screen for sleep apnea or other sleep disruptive problems. Now again, the concept is rest or restoration, so let's think more broadly than just sleep. Vacations. Vacations have been an important part of human history and resilience creating dynamics for a very long time. They're a different kind of rest. They're a period of getting away from the normal routine. Historically, these have been cultural festivals, religious events, pilgrimages, all kinds of different things. But what we're looking for is the factor of rest, not just a change of schedule or a change of scenery, and that's very important. And we'll touch on that in just a minute. So we're looking for all forms of restorative downtime. What is helping people recharge? What is helping them reset? What charges their batteries up again, if you will, to be ready for the next go-round, be it the day or week, the month, whatever it is. So there is a common misperception or a very shallow understanding of rest or vacation that we have in our society, both providers and patients. We need to understand that a real vacation, what gives us benefit, is not the wild trip to Disneyland from which you come back more tired than when you left, which is very common if you actually start to ask people. But did you let your hair down? Did you go wade in the ocean? Did you sleep in? Did you just read a book? Do you feel like you're really ready? You're in a better place, more recharged than when you left or not? Very important principle to get to what we're really after in terms of rest and restoration. Okay, number 3, relationships. Now we can think of relationships in terms of quantity times quality. That's fine. We need to put this in the context of the bigger picture, like the TED Talk by Brene Brown. Many people in healthcare, especially researchers studying human beings, end up coming to the conclusion we are here to connect. It's what our existence is about. Now, relationships in this measure, we're talking about horizontal relationships or person-to-person relationships. We'll talk about the vertical dimension in a little bit. Number 1 for most people is your spouse or significant other. What's going on there? Lots of research looking at the quality and dynamics of the marriage relationship and what effects that has, for positive or for negative. Fundamentally, you look at nature, you look at human history, you look at biology, reproduction. This mating thing is a very, very strong, significant, major dynamic in our existence. Managing those relationships, navigating them, becomes very important to our mental, emotional, relational, and yes, physical health. A lot of research on this. Other family in the same household. We have challenges in today's society, especially in industrialized countries, with our ability to do transportation and education and modern technology. We get so torn apart, so fragmented. Even the household unit is getting very, very fragmented. People don't just sit down for dinner together anymore and have that connecting and family time. Extended family has really changed. People used to live in one area for multiple generations. Many parts of the world that's still true, but many parts of the world it's not. People are moving every few years. Families are fragmented further and further, not just within a state or a country anymore, but even around the world. This breaks up what has been the normal human experience. Don't forget work, coworkers. The work environment has a major impact on our human experience. Think about how much time we actually spend at work. If it's 40 hours a week and we're awake for 16 hours a day, let's say, you're spending half of your 5 days at work. That's a major part of your existence. Don't forget the work environment and the relationships at work. it is impressive when you actually listen to patients how many of them are experiencing stress and issues relative to dynamics at work. And of course, there's our social groups, be that church or religious, sports, professional, hobbies, whatever those may be. A lot of that has moved online. Pros and cons. In some sense, it's easier to connect. In other ways, it's harder to connect. Be aware of those dynamics in terms of relationships. Loneliness has become a huge issue in modern life. You look at the statistics, the health impacts. It is a big, big problem, especially in the context of understanding that we human beings are here to connect. And when we're lonely, we're fundamentally not feeling what we're here for. It's going to have huge physiologic impact. Keep in mind, this is not a factor of the number of people around. You can go to work in a busy environment, you can go to the gym in a busy environment and be terribly lonely. Just think of all the famous people, the rock stars, the movie stars that end up committing suicide. They're the center of attention, and yet they're incredibly lonely. Do you have people in your life that you know would be there for you, truly be there for you if and when life falls apart? That's often the essence of it, if you will. Do you have people that you can truly be honest with about the most difficult parts of life? And will they still really care about you? Or will they reject you? Oh, you're not so squeaky clean as I thought you were. See ya. That's the dynamic we're talking about. Okay, chemicals. Chemicals, again, very broadly. There are going to be common issues and categories, but chemicals broadly. For the most part, these are mood or mind-altering substances. An external way to change how we feel, the mood that we're experiencing, the emotions that we're experiencing at this point in time. So an artificial way of managing our emotions, our mood, how we feel, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, socially. For health purposes, for physiologic purposes, we get the short-term benefit, but it's like you're poisoning yourself. This is not about what's legal or illegal. Just forget all the legality stuff for a while, okay? This is just physiology, just pure physiology. In that context, given the general availability, acceptance, and so forth, alcohol is probably the single biggest problem. Tobacco is a huge problem also for lung and heart disease, but alcohol for physical issues, heart, stroke, so forth, but also for the mental and emotional. It may help for the moment, big downsides for anyone who uses any substantial amounts, which is probably far too many people. So alcohol, tobacco, of course, are obvious. We still don't know about vaping. There's a lot of concern about vaping, especially in the young, not getting really monitored and sorted out very fast. So we're going to have a lot of stuff happening that we then have to follow and just see what happens. Marijuana has been very much in the public eye, public discourse, nationally, state level, medical marijuana, recreational marijuana. Conflict between state laws, federal laws creates a lot of confusion and problems. Forget the legalities, physiologically. The physiology seems to be that it's much less problematic than alcohol. That's not to say it's not problematic, just less so. Less incapacitating, if you will. Again, always relative to the dose. If you're totally stoned, obviously you're not going to work right. And you can be intoxicated and driving and not drive right. But put it into physiologic perspective. All the science that I've seen would lead me to believe that marijuana makes people feel better temporarily, which is why it's used. Not nearly so harmful as alcohol, but again, the dose is what makes the poison. And then you get to the really bad stuff. You know, the meth, the crack, the cocaine, the heroin, the street fentanyl, which has become a real problem. Of course, can be absolutely devastating. And yet it's surprising how many people continue to function while being pretty significant regular users. Interesting dynamics. Then there are these stimulants that are legal. The caffeine, the energy drinks, the pep pills. And it's important that we distinguish, especially for these, the difference between physical morbidity, mortality, and the effects on the nervous system and our mental function. Caffeine, coffee, filtered versus unfiltered, making a difference probably, but we're seeing the indication of some benefit from coffee and some teas, what's safe, but we don't factor in oftentimes the short-term and or possibly even long-term effects of what it's doing to a person's nervous system and why it is that they need these substances to get out of bed in the morning. Obviously something's not working right. They weren't designed to have caffeine to function. So let's keep some perspective on that. And of course, don't forget prescription medications. Legally, formally prescribed, or otherwise. Polypharmacy is a huge problem. Of course, opiates have become a huge problem that we're dealing with currently. So take chemicals in their entirety, understand the issues involved. Okay, number 5, activity. Use it or lose it. The body needs regular, healthy stimulation. I want you to work, body. I want you to do this and to do that and to do it well and to do it better. The body responds. It's this beautiful machine. Basic recommendations are generally pretty good, I think, based on the evidence. 30 plus minutes, moderate activity, 5 plus days per week, or the equivalent. Some people like to do the intense stuff, shorter period of time. That's great. But that basic reference point is where we see the best bang for the buck. You can get more benefit with more exercise, but the benefit to exertion curve starts to bend. What is ideal? Of course, a mix of things. And if you look at the guidelines over time, it's interesting to see where they started and what they've gradually added over time. It's getting progressively a bit more complex, a bit more broad. Cardiovascular is huge, of course, for a lot of different systems, and just getting the whole thing pumping and flowing has all kinds of benefits, and the lymphatic system. Of course, muscle and strength, resistance training, if you will, has its own benefits. Staying strong, staying capable, helps us avoid back injuries. The number of people with low back problems because their core is just weak and flaccid is pretty impressive. Balance is important, especially as we get older. Falling downstairs, falling and breaking a hip, all kinds of things, and just wanting to function well and not feel frail. And flexibility. The body is amazing in terms of sort of snugging things up on a regular basis. So we don't just get loose and flop around. We start to have aging effects in addition, and we start to get stiff. So flexibility is important too. We need to keep in mind that there are many productive and fun activities that do all of these at once. That's actually what human beings are designed for. Human beings weren't designed to have a gym and have to do each of these individually and separately. That's very artificial. If we need to do that, that's fine. But let's not stay there. Let's not use that as our reference point. Our reference point should be normal, healthy function. Part of activity is oftentimes helping patients identify where they're already getting activity and they're not recognizing it. They're seeing, oh, I don't think I'm exercising. I have this huge mountain to climb where I'm supposed to be and it seems so impossible. Help them start to see where they're already getting exercise that counts. That's really encouraging to the patient. Again, if this is about the patient, let's make it about the patient. Make it an educational process. Help them to learn how to identify, how to look for natural physical activity, especially if it's enjoyable. You can use steps, you can use trackers, that's great, that's fine. Objective measures are always desirable, though again, that's not primarily the objective of the system and the system's intended beneficiary. So ask about recreation, hobbies, yard work. Help them to see the enjoyable things. If they used to really like riding their bike and for whatever reason, they got out of the habit, get that back on the radar. Hey, I used to really enjoy that, huh? Oh, I wonder if my buddy Joe is still riding. Maybe I can connect with him again. So there's reframing for patient benefit that can be occurring as you're looking at and discussing what's going on in the drivers of their health or disease. It's not just data collection for medical processes and purposes. So listen, really listen. Try to hear what has worked for them in the past. Help them acknowledge that. help them see where they have been successful, start to help shape their identity as a successful, healthy person to build upon going forward. And tie that into what plans or goals do they have? Do they want to go on a trip to India? Do they want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro? Hike the Pacific Crest Trail, at least for a week or something. Do something with their grandchildren or their family or their high school buddy. Tie that into what makes life really enjoyable for them and fulfilling. Okay, the next one, nature. This one is kind of fun, I think. This is talking about things that are external to the patient, not what's going on within their own body or their immediate sphere, if you will. What is their relationship to the natural world? And there's several frames of reference that we can look at this through. And this is a bit of a complex metric in trying to put all these pieces together. But it's fundamentally, what is this person's relationship to the natural world, and are they in sync with it or out of sync with it? Because that will change their physiology. So, A, chronobiology, relative to time and the biological processes that typically happen on a time basis. There's the obvious day-night cycle, light, sleep, so forth. The circadian rhythms of the body are very impressive, and these cycles and rhythms can be very large with some pretty big swings. We get backwards, sideways with Mother Nature. Mother Nature always wins. Okay, that's the bottom line. So how do we, human beings, be in harmony with Mother Nature? It's also helpful, I think, to think in terms of nature as flora and fauna. What am I doing relative to plants, everything of plant matter on the planet, and fauna, animals? For most of us in modern society, the flora ends up being things like gardening, farming, hiking, parks, camping, houseplants. Forest bathing has become a thing in research, especially in Japan. You have sunbathing, forest bathing. So you just go out and you are in that environment exposed to that aspect of nature. And it has physiologic benefit. Health restoring processes are stimulated in us physiologically. Fauna. Many people, this is pets. For some, it might be some degree of farming. Maybe they participate in community-supported agriculture and work on a farm or have a little farm stand. It may be helping animals, caring for animals otherwise. So what is going on with other, not just mammals, it could be any kind of fauna, if you will. But what is happening there? So we want to look at not simply the facts, not just do they have a garden, do they enjoy gardening? Or is it a burden? Is it a hassle? It's like, oh, well, I can't go on this vacation because I have to water my plants and I can't get anyone else. So it's more than just the fact of something happening. If you have a pet that you despise, which is not the norm, fortunately, maybe your spouse's pet, that's not a positive, counted up sort of thing. That may be a negative. So don't just stick on the surface, look for the dynamics beneath. It's also helpful to look at things in general in our environment, things such as air, city. Pollution has a negative effect physiologically. Do people get out of the city periodically? Do they have mold in their house? Is their ventilation system full of mold or other crud? Do they live in a very sealed environment? All these things will have a physiologic effect. It's going to be hard to get into too many of those weeds, obviously, in a simple system, but keep those kinds of dynamics in mind. Also think in terms of our senses. What is our experience from our physical environment for our senses? Light, sound, temperature. Are they positive? Are they helpful? Are they healthy? Are they in sync with our circadian rhythms naturally, or are they fighting it? Are they contrary to it and creating problems for us? Sound. People that live next to train tracks or busy roads have higher blood pressure. Light at night, especially blue light, is going to mess up our sleep cycle. These are very real physiologic impacts. And of course, there's our basic things like water, from bathing, hygiene, And of course, drinking, which we're going to put under nutrition, which we're moving to now. So, number 7, nutrition. What is our fuel, our biological, physiologic fuel that we're running on, or this person is running on? What is the system designed to run on? We have some great videos, we being the Lifestyle Medicine Foundation at lifestylefacts.org. What I hope are some of the most helpful videos, 2 parts, called Fad-Proof Nutrition. How do you know what the best basic human diet is? Not what is it, per se, but how do you know? How can we give people a frame of reference for understanding and interpreting whatever fad is coming their way from the talking heads and the advertisements and the latest, super meal bars or whatever it is? How do we fad-proof people for nutrition? So we just walk them through how to know what the best basic diet is for human beings. Obviously, the human body is amazing and will try to burn anything we put in. It's phenomenal. Doesn't mean the system is going to run ideally on just anything or things other than what it is built for. Okay, so just to walk through a couple of those basic concepts for the purposes of Vitalities and what we do in fad-proof nutrition. What nutrition patterns are associated epidemiologically all around the world, all different ethnicities, with the longest, healthiest lives? The blue zones, great example. Scientists can understand it, patients can understand it. Here's where we have this unusual percentage of people over 100 years old. What are these people doing? Different ethnicities, different parts of the world, different cultures. What are the commonalities? Not rocket science. This is rational thought process and research 101. Number 2, what nutritional interventions, when someone has disease, produce the best outcomes? What is most effective at reversing that disease process and getting the body back to healthy condition? What is that pattern? What is that nutrition? Essentially, these consistently show unrefined plant food-based diets produce the best results. There's going to be variance of opinion. We can have those discussions in professional circles, but it's important that we have the same fundamental reference point and not get into this confusion that has so many providers and so many patients really confused. Blue zones, some of them were vegetarian, as in vegan, some of them were not, but the proportion of animal food was very, very low, and it was a very clean animal-sourced product, if you will, be it fish, be it grass-fed sheep, or whatever it was. More important issue is what is the relativeness of different dietary patterns. If you look at who lives the longest and healthiest with different dietary patterns, and you start to put them on a scale, Dean Ornish, the book Spectrum, speaks to this. It's important that we understand this proportionally or relatively. What is it that makes the big differences versus the small differences? I've seen a lot of arguing about things that make only tiny differences, while we're missing the things that make the big differences. So go to your best sources of information. The True Health Initiative. If you're not familiar with that, get familiar with it. It's all these lifestyle medicine, nutrition experts from around the world saying, look, we agree on 80% of this stuff. We quibble about the 20% for different reasons, different lines of evidence, but there's really not that much confusion. Let's put the confusion to bed, get back to the evidence, and best help our patients with clear messaging and options for what they choose to do. Okay, chronobiology of eating is really important, and we put this into nutrition. Boiling down a lot of science, cutting to the chase, what I explain to my patients is, look, human metabolism is like a furnace or a fireplace. Put the fuel in when you're going to want it to burn for a while and produce heat, i.e., first part of the day, middle of the day. You don't pack the fireplace or the wood stove, cram full, and then lock everything down for the night when you're wanting it to burn in the normal fashion. Now, there's some wood stoves, we won't get into the details of those, that may work a little bit differently. There's things you set for nighttime. But fundamentally, like a fireplace, We want the fire, the metabolic fire, to go out and be done when we're going to bed so the body can do its rest thing. The rest principle is a fundamental principle of all biological systems in nature, and you will not violate it without paying the price. Honor the rest system. So if you're going to eat in the evening, it should be relatively early, it should be relatively light, not the typical American thing of loading up the heaviest foods late at night. You go to bed, the body can't rest, the metabolism is working, the brain can't take out the trash. We wake up feeling like we've been run over, we need 3 cups of coffee to get going because we just can't get our eyelids open because our body didn't rest last night. We made it work all night. Hello? Okay, the body has a lot that it's doing at night that we want to let it do and do well. Time-restricted eating is getting on people's radar. It's becoming popular. A lot of good potential benefit from that, which basically says, let the body rest. Don't just keep it working all the time, digestively, metabolically. Okay, principle, first, do no harm. That's what we're talking about here. Don't violate the fundamental principle of the cycles of rest and recovery. Let the digestive system have a break too. Next principle, meet the needs of the system. Nothing crazy. Don't get rigid and stuck in a given paradigm. You can only eat this many calories at this point in time. If somebody goes on a huge hike or huge run, eat what you need. If you work really, really hard physically one day, eat more calories. Fine. Your meal pattern may be off a little bit. Keep your basic reference system as best as you can. Don't forget, if it's not on your radar yet, the concept or the option of fasting. Fasting has been part of human existence and history for a very long time. The science is building pretty rapidly recently and is pretty powerful. It's actually pretty exciting. If there is such thing as a panacea other than your fundamental lifestyle things, fasting is probably it. Water or fluids. We put water or fluids into the nutrition piece, basically anything going into the mouth. We want to factor into this nutrition metric. Our society, it seems largely for commercial purposes, is pretty obsessed with drink, all this flavor and fizz and fuss and bacteria and, oh my goodness, it's crazy. What is normal for human beings on planet Earth? Water? More water? Maybe for special events, some juice or a little wine or beer. Water. Water, water, water. Water is historically what human beings have functioned with, what they've run on. So whenever we do all this funny, fizzy colored calorie stuff, it's not going to work right. It's really just kind of plain weird for human physiology and history. We need people to be well hydrated. Good quality pure water. People may need to adjust their taste buds. Water does taste very different, and yes, it does make a difference if you have good tasting water or nasty tasting water in terms of how much people will actually end up drinking. Okay, principle number 8, the spiritual. The spiritual dimension is about the who of the person and connection in the vertical. This is something we're going to cover in more detail when we get to the neuron model. This is about being. In the verb sense, it's about be. To be or not to be. It's about being. It's not about religion or religious practices. Now, those may be present. Those can be associated with very good things, good health outcomes, a systematic way of experiencing spirituality. But religion, religious practices, and spirituality physiologically, experientially, are not equivalent. They often overlap, they often significantly overlap, but they're not the same thing. So, for providers and patients, we're going to have to overcome some of our confusion and biases in this space and separate some of these things out. This boils down in the who of the neuron, we'll talk about this more later, to value, sense of worth, and identity. And what is our relationship in the vertical aspect? Bigger picture, higher power, God, divine being, universe, whatever that may be. So what is it that's important about these aspects? First of all, it's important to understand something, especially in the context of scientific circles, where it gets pretty hardcore and reductionistic, to understand the history of human experience. Mankind worships. It just is. Okay, look around the planet. Look through human history. Mankind worships. If it's not a cultural deity, a god, it's a set of gods, whatever. If we get rid of all the gods, what do human beings do? They worship other human beings, be it an emperor or a king or whatever. American Idol as a TV program, what is that about? Well, we're sort of worshiping other human beings that we look up to, pop stars, rock stars, whatever. Mankind worships. Just realize that. We can look at this spiritual or religious things in different contexts. Herbert Benson at Harvard has come to the conclusion that human beings are hardwired for faith. Now, some of that may be simply believing something to be true, and there's a kind of faith that is believing in a higher power, universe, something outside of above ourselves. I've seen too many really distorted dynamics in quote-unquote scientific circles trying to eliminate this aspect of human experience and who we are as human beings, and it always gets ugly when we try to just say this is not in existence when it is in existence. I find it very unscientific. Okay, from this sense of connection to a higher power, a greater purpose, is where meaning and purpose comes from. Meaning and purpose isn't the core of spirituality, but it is tightly related to, is a product of. If I have no sense of value, no sense of identity, I have no idea where I fit into the big picture, I really don't have much meaning or purpose, or it's very shallow. So even if I don't think I have a lot of this stuff figured out, I may have a lot of meaning and purpose because of issues of identity and value that are positive, that have been developed, that are motivating me to do something, to be something, to make a positive contribution to the world and to other people. And this core very largely affects and shapes our thinking, our feeling or emotions, our motivation, and our behaviors, and thus our relationships with other people. Most of the most radical transformations on the behavior level are often a product of someone who has had a spiritual or religious experience or conversion. This is where you see people that are just totally strung out drug addicts become positive contributors to society and helping other drug addicts. Let's not categorically dismiss the spiritual dimension thinking it is somehow scientific. Please. This is the core of who we are and from which we derive meaning and purpose. Leave the religion and all that baggage off to some other corner, if you will. And again, we'll touch on this in the neuron model. So the vertical aspect of human existence, is it working for the patient sitting in front of me? Is it creating meaning and purpose for them? Is this vertical spiritual aspect of who they are and their value, is it positive and productive? Or are they just lost, ambiguous, whatever that is, without that working for them? If you start looking for this, you start seeing what a big deal this really is. So, what we want to do is provide productive guidance for our patient. This is not about trying to convince them to join a commune or a religion. It's about helping them to recognize for them as a person this part of themselves and what is or is not working for them at present, and perhaps to understand why. There's a lot of science showing that often all we can measure is religious practices like church attendance or praying, but a lot of positive health benefits associated with those. The few studies that show that's not true, or where there's a negative thing, when you dig into what's really going on with those people, there's something negative going on in the vertical. God has forsaken me, God hates me, I'm going to go to hell. So we put the spiritual metric or measure last, not because it's the least important. In many ways it's actually the most important, but it's the most misunderstood. Patients may be reluctant to think in terms of spiritual things in a healthcare setting because we have become so secular and sterilized our healthcare system. We want people to get comfortable, to understand we're not out to get in their face, we're not out to do anything inappropriate. We're just simply trying to understand what is and isn't working for them and to acknowledge this very important dimension of who they are and how it's playing out in their life. Okay, let's talk about some case examples. What does this look like? What might this look like? So let's pick a couple made-up people, but are pretty typical perhaps, and we want to use these examples as we go through the different systems so we can give you a full spectrum experience, if you will. So let's say we have a patient, Melinda, overweight, middle-aged woman with diabetes and hypertension. What might her vitalities look like? Stress? Depends on her relationships, on her job, other factors. You know, maybe she's working a regular office job. Maybe that's part of her being overweight. She's just sitting all day. She's sedentary. Stress for most people in this situation is probably going to be mid to high. Exercise, probably sedentary, probably not getting a lot of exercise, or she wouldn't have these conditions. Relationships, maybe she's pretty typical, married, teenage kids, one out of the house, going through this. Nutrition, sleep, rest, we can go through all of these. Maybe she has sleep apnea. Maybe being overweight is leading to sleep apnea, and that's part of the contribution to her hypertension. And or if she's not sleeping well, that will affect the metabolism and the diabetes. You know, what is going on spiritually? Another thing in this spiritual and or religious context that's interesting, statistically based on the data, at least in America, the Christian segment of the population, which has been the dominant religion, if you will, in America, they often have higher rates of obesity and higher metabolic health problems. Just an interesting observation or dynamic, just to pay attention to. So look at what is going on with someone like this. Again, if Melinda has filled this out while she's checking in, by the time she's in the exam room and I'm sitting down with her, she's already had to think through all of this. This is all teed up, ready to go, ready for me to discuss it with her. So Melinda, let's look at the drivers of your health or your disease right now. We want to focus on treating the cause and not just the symptoms and the consequences. With more and more pills and procedures and problems and complications, how much can we build your care based on addressing the causes of your problems and empowering you to be in charge of those conditions, that you may not have to have them or at least can significantly reduce your medications? People like that. Many people don't like taking so many pills, even if they've gotten used to being a pill popper, given that's just kind of all we do. Let's take another example. Let's say Norm is a 52-year-old executive. He's hard charging, he watches his diet, he exercises every day, but he has hypertension, he has palpitations, he has insomnia, kind of episodically, and he's just diagnosed with prostate cancer. What might his vitalities look like? So again, we already mentioned he watches his diet and he exercises every day. And if all we were doing is looking at the typical diet and exercise, we'd say, you're knocking it out of the park, Norm, good for you. Pat, pat, pat on the back, see you next time. He's got hypertension, palpitations, insomnia, cancer, hello? Are we really looking at the whole person and the whole picture? Well, his rest is messed up. Why? Probably because he's really stressed out. His stress level is probably extremely high consistently, which is going to have a huge negative effect on all of his physiology. His relationships, maybe in the toilet, maybe he's in the middle of a divorce. Maybe there's a lot of strife at work, a lot of pressure at work. Maybe he has no idea of what he's doing in life other than trying to build up a big bank account for retirement. And that's really eating on him. And he doesn't have an inherent motivation to do positive things other than to look good physically. So we need to look at and consider all these factors and forces. Future direction, developments, vision for vitalities. Okay, this is kind of fun. I hope we get here sooner rather than later. But we want to end up with Vitalities being something that people can do on their smartphone and their iPad. In a medical clinical context, we want to be able to just hand people an iPad and have them tap, 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 and they're done. At the same time, if they want to understand this measure better, they hit the little info button, a little pop-up says, oh, well, here's what this is. Here's a 0, here's a 5, here's a 10. Oh, okay. Tap, go away. Well, I'm a 6.5 today. Next. Really straightforward, super clean, super efficient, super useful to the patient and to the provider and to everyone else. To become something that can be used as a universal database. If these systems can tie into a central place and a central process, they could potentially be used to increasingly benefit the patient, pushing information back to them, tips, resources, connecting them to providers, practices, other things, systems, tools, communities. But fundamentally, the future of healthcare is active learning. And to make Vitalities built on a platform of active learning could get very exciting. Okay, continuously updated. We want to be staying on top of the science. Do we need to tweak, what's a 5 on rest? And if so, how? So periodically updating this, making it more accurate. How do we tie in increased use of biometrics, wearables, monitors, etc., to get more and more objective data, physiologic data, and relate that to our clinical experience, the patient experience. So of course, refining over time, making it bi-directional for the benefit of the patient. So that is Vitalities in clinical practice, a lifestyle medicine vital signs system to easily, efficiently track the drivers of health or disease. Imagine in your mind as we move to some of our other topics. The Vitalities is in that big bottom portion of the pyramid, the whole person comprehensive care model, helping us understand and measure lifestyle as the foundation of care. Vitalities for a better kind of healthcare that really brings vitality to our patients and to our practice.